However, just at that moment, the gate of one of the cottages nearby opened, and a boy came rushing out. He looked scared, and that was no wonder, because head over heels after him came 5 other boys. They soon caught him, and they pushed him against the fence, and all 5 began to punch and hit him. He cried and held his arms in front of his face to protect himself. "Give it to him! Give it to him!" cried the oldest and strongest of the boys, "so that he'll never dare to show himself on this street again." "Oh," said Annika, "it's Willie they're hurting. Oh, how can they be so mean?" "It's that awful Bengt. He's always in a fight," said Tommy. "And 5 against 1. What cowards!" Pippi went up to the boys and tapped Bengt on the back with her forefinger. "Hello there," she said. "What's the idea? Are you trying to make hash out of little Willie with all 5 of you jumping him at once?" Bengt turned around and saw a little girl he had never seen before, a wild-looking little stranger who dared to touch him. For a while, he just stood and gaped at her in astonishment. Then a broad grin spread over his face. "Boys," he said, "boys, let Willie alone, and take a look at this girl. What a babe!" He slapped his knees and laughed, and in an instant they had all flocked around Pippi, all except Willie, who wiped away his tears and walked cautiously over to stand next to Tommy. "Have you ever seen hair like hers, red as fire, and such shoes?" Bengt continued. "Can't I borrow one? I'd like to go out rowing, and I don't have a boat." He took hold of one of Pippi's braids, but dropped it instantly and cried, "Ouch! I burned myself." Then all 5 boys joined hands around Pippi, jumping up and down and screaming, "Redhead, redhead!" Pippi stood in the middle of the ring and smiled in the friendliest way. Bengt had hoped that she would get mad and begin to cry. At least she ought to have looked scared. When nothing happened, he gave her a push. "I don't think you have a very nice way with ladies," said Pippi, and she lifted him in her strong arms high in the air and carried him to a birch tree and hung him over a branch. Then she took the next boy and hung him over another branch. The next one she set on a gate post outside a cottage, and the next she threw right over a fence so that he landed in a flower bed. The last of the fighters she put in a tiny toy cart that was by the road. Then Pippi, Tommy, Annika, and Willie stood and looked at the boys for a while. The boys were absolutely speechless with fright. And Pippi said, "You are cowards. 5 of you attacking one boy? That's cowardly." Cowardly means that you're not brave. "Then you began to push a helpless little girl around. Oh, how mean!" "Come now, we'll go home," she said to Tommy and Annika. And to Willie, "If they try to hurt you again, you come tell me." And to Bengt, who sat up in the tree and didn't dare to stir, she said, "Is there anything else you have to say about my hair and my shoes?" "If so, you better say it now, before I go home." But Bengt had nothing more to say about Pippi's shoes or her hair either. So Pippi took her can in one hand and her spool in the other and went away, followed by Tommy and Annika. When they were back home in Pippi's garden, Pippi said, "Dear me, how awful! Here I found 2 beautiful things, and you didn't get anything. You must hunt a little more. Tommy, why don't you look in that old hollow tree? Old trees are usually about the best places of all for thing finders." Tommy said that he didn't believe he and Annika would ever find anything, but to please Pippi, he put his hand slowly down into the hollow tree trunk. "Goodness!" he cried. utterly amazed, and pulled out his hand. In it, he held a little notebook with a leather cover. In a special loop, there was a little silver pencil. "Well, that's queer," said Tommy. Queer is another word for strange. "Now, see that?" said Pippi. "There's nothing so nice as being a thing finder. Well, it's a wonder there aren't more people that take it up. There'll be tailors and shoemakers and chimney sweeps and such like. But thing finders? No, indeed, that isn't good enough for them. And then she said to Annika, "Why don't you feel in that old tree stump? One practically always finds things in an old tree stump." Annika stuck her hand down in the stump, and almost immediately she got hold of a red coral necklace. She and Tommy stood open-mouthed for a long time. They were so astonished. They thought that hereafter they would be thing finders every single day. Pippi had been up half the night before, playing ball, and now she suddenly felt sleepy. "I think I'll go and have a nap," she said. "Can't you come with me and tuck me in?" When Pippi was sitting on the edge of the bed, taking off her shoes, she looked at them thoughtfully and said, "He was going out rowing, he said, that old banked." She snorted disdainfully. "I'll teach him to row, indeed I will. Another time." "Say, Pippi," said Tommy respectfully, "why is it that you wear such big shoes?" "Well, so I can wiggle my toes, of course," she answered. Then she crept into bed. She always slept with her feet on the pillow and her head way down under the quilt. "That's the way they sleep in Guatemala," she announced. "And it's the only real way to sleep. See, like this, I can wiggle my toes when I'm sleeping too." And this is a picture of when Pippi was telling Annika and Tommy where to look for some cool things. "Can you go to sleep without a lullaby?" she went on. "I always have to sing to myself for a while. Otherwise, I can't sleep a wink." Tommy and Annika heard a humming sound under the quilt. It was Pippi singing herself to sleep. Quietly and cautiously, they tiptoed out so that they would not disturb her. In the doorway, they turned to take a last look toward the bed. They could see nothing of Pippi except her feet resting on the pillow. There she lay, wiggling her toes emphatically. Tommy and Annika ran home. Annika held her coral necklace tightly in her hand. "That certainly was strange," she said. "Tommy, you don't suppose— Well, do you suppose that Pippi had put these things in place beforehand?" "You never can tell," said Tommy. "You just never can tell about anything when it comes to Pippi." And that's the end of chapter 2.